start? Afternoon, everyone. My name is Bharat Gopalaswamy, and I direct the South Asia Center here. I'm pleased to welcome one of the oldest friends of the Council, Ikram Sehgal, who happens to be surprisingly here during the day of the elections. And I asked him the story, why is he here? And he said to me, this date was picked a long time ago. But he's been glued to his phone watching the results as it unfolds. And if you've read his recent article, he's right on the money about the election results. So the next time you are following an election and you are going to place a bet, he is the man to follow. But without much introduction, I want to make this more of an informal session. What I'm going to do is turn over the floor to you. Why don't you say a few introductory remarks? Feel free to jump in, interrupt. And before you interrupt, I would like for you to press the mic, introduce yourself, and we're recording the event, and we would like to capture everything. So that's why I request you to speak into the mic rather than speaking outside it. Without that, Ikram, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Bharat, and I'm very grateful to you at short notice that you arranged this. One likes to put his money where his mouth is. And I want to give a little background as to how I think myself qualified to be able to predict this election. About almost 50 years ago, I was flying a Eloite-3 helicopter, and I was attached to the Commander 1 Corps in Mangla. And at that point of time, there was this elections about to happen in Pakistan. And the Commander 1 Corps wanted to know roughly what's happening, because he was getting this information that the Muslim League, even though 3 factions of it would get maximum seats, etc., the Jamaat Islami. Well, so they called me in, and I was a young pilot. They said, you'll put a G2 intelligence with you, and we want you to crisscross the central Punjab and northern Punjab. Just crisscross and just get a flavor of who's going to vote for whom. At that point of time, I had no idea of the party symbols and all that. And so I land with a helicopter. Helicopter was a very innovative thing. People used to congregate. They used to ask him, who are you going to vote for? So this chap said, Talwar, the sword. Who does this symbol belong to? So Captain, asked this other guy. They said, it's Pakistan People's Party. He said, whoa, Pakistan People's Party? He said, not going to happen. Anyway, we did this 2-3 days, and we came back, and these people did the report. And when they did this report, they said that, and along the GT road, if you flew, you see only the Pakistan People's Party flags on the rooftops. The first thing happened was, third day I was hauled up and said, why did you doctor this report in favor of PPP? I said, I was not making the report. The G2 intelligence was there. There was my crew chief there. We all saw this happening. And he asked me to say, fine, back me up, and I said this. Then I discovered actually my granduncle was the Secretary General of the Pakistan People's Party, Mr. J. Rahim. So they said, oh, this guy is doctoring the results. But in 1970, actually the results came out like that. It was a crude poll. But the 2 elections were 2 different elections in 1970. The elections were different in West Pakistan. The elections were different in East Pakistan. In East Pakistan, there was a nationalism election on nationalism, Bengali nationalism. In West Pakistan, it was on socialism, right? If people, Roti, Kapra and Makan was a catchy slogan. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, he got in a mixture of people, etc. So, come down 50 years hence, and luckily I have a private security company. Hello, Jim. I have a private security company, and my private security company, we are actually in 35 cities and towns physically. So I said, okay, let's do some crude polling. And the results were very surprising, very contrary to what the media was saying. The electronic media and the print media were almost saying that you cannot break the PMLN hold in Punjab, right? In Sindh or Balochistan, in Sindh, of course, PPP was dominant, and the MQM had broken up. In Balochistan, was a potpourri of parties. In KPK, almost everybody agreed that Imran would win, but they said by what margin. But in the Punjab, people disagreed. With the result that when I wrote this article on last Friday, my newspaper, which to print my article, refused to print it, saying it was one-sided. So I offered it to another newspaper, Daily Times, and they were very happy to print it, right? And my predictions were based on what we had gathered and why we had gathered this information. And there were some reasons for it. The first reason was that having been disqualified, the Prime Minister, Nawaz Sharif, had lost that particular hold of the federal government that is very necessary if the incumbent is to win an election. Please mark my words very carefully. Number two, that because southern Punjab had been asking for some time that give us a separate province, you promised a separate province, and PMLN turned them down totally. 22 MNAs and MPs from southern Punjab in block left PMLN. 22. And they joined PTI. At this point of time, a third factor came in, which not very well known here. You know, when the elections are done, the Pakistan Administrative Service consists of two major portions. One is the district management room, the elite, the civil service of Pakistan, the federal, and then the provincial civil service. They actually, on the ground, the provincial civil service is the one which mans the polling booths, mans everything. Now, in November, one of persons close to Shahbaz Sharif was arrested for corruption, Ahad Chima. He's a very senior officer. When he was arrested for corruption, this DMG group in Punjab decided to go on a pen-down strike. And they said, no bureaucrat in Punjab will work until this chap is released. Well, only 20 people out of the 200 DMG officers followed them, and only 20 out of 2,000 PCS officers followed them. The strike broke. But with the breaking of the strike, the provincial civil service that they had over the provincial civil service broke. So the hold that Shahbaz Sharif utilized in the last elections to win over 35 to 40 seats, possibly, was gone. Now, how did he win the seats? He won the seats not because the caretaker chief minister did something for him. He won the seats because the caretaker chief minister did nothing. He allowed Shahbaz Sharif, he sat back, Najm Sethi, and allowed the Shahbaz Sharif to run things, with the result that votes which were, which say seats which were close by, it didn't go to PTI, it went to PMLN. PMLN would still have won. There's no question about it. They would still have got about 100 seats rather than the 130 seats that they got. But the Tehreek-e-Insaf would have got more seats. Another thing which people didn't realize is the religious bloc. There are two types of religious bloc. One is the extreme religious bloc, one is the moderate religious bloc. The extreme religious bloc, the moderate religious bloc are formed under a grouping called the MMA, that is the Jamaat Islami, the JUIF, etc. But the extreme religious bloc, which has just come up, Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan, which this wheelchair bound mullah, They control about 15, 16,000 votes almost in every constituency up and down. Now, they decided to form a party themselves. So now you have the provincial civil service not actively working for the PMLN, 15, 16,000 votes in every constituency gone to a separate religious party, right? And then you have the factor about which Imran kept on hammering throughout his campaign about accountability, right? And I think despite himself, and let me be very clear about it, Imran has tried his best to lose the election, right? He's gone and disturbed the elite no end, right? He has got his third marriage and it was not seen very well by the drawing rooms, right? And in fact, I tell you personally, a lot of my family members, etc., etc. So, what is this person up to? The thing, etc. But there was a factor when you come down and said, okay, fine, he's done this wrong, he's done this wrong, he's done this wrong, he's done this wrong. But would you still vote for Nawaz Sharif or Zardari? And they said no. So either they would abstain or they would still vote for Imran Khan. So my prediction was that easily, he would get about 95 to 100 seats, very easily. And that's the worst case scenario for him, right? And if there is a meltdown, which I feel that there is from the results that I see coming in at the moment.
So he's 73.
He's more than that. No. I'll just give you the
82?
photo.
Yeah.
He is now he's leading in 90 seats. PMLN got 52, PMLN 30, Independents 20 at the moment, right? So, very close to, in fact, Arif was there the other day and we discussed this on that day only when my article came out. And, this thing. So, it was not something that you say, if I've done something of genius. It was there on the cards. I just have to be objective about it. Now, if he goes past 110 seats, then he does not need a coalition with either PPP or PMLN, which is a good thing. And a good thing is that PMLN and PPP combined also give him considerable opposition in the assemblies. A strong opposition is good. So let us say we get best of both worlds. We get Imran Khan into power. Man, at least nobody can comment upon his honesty. But on the other hand, you would still have a check and balance on him, right? Now, the $64,000 question, which I know you're going to ask me, has the army interfered in the elections? The military always interferes in elections. But the question is, to what extent? The military knew very well that he would win the elections. What the military did was ensure that all the rigging, manipulation, etc., did not happen. They also made sure they made their preference well known to the people, that this is our preference, right? Without announcing it to the world, right? They didn't go and twist anybody's arms, because if that has been so, you would have people on television saying that this chap came and twisted my arm. There's not a single candidate who has come on television from PMLN today who can say that this was done to me, right? But let me give you another thing about it. When you attack the army, and you attack the judiciary, put aside the judiciary, when you attack the army, what are you thinking about in the Punjab? In North and Central Punjab? Every house has got 2 or 3 servicemen, serving servicemen or ex-servicemen. And you are attacking them no end, day in and day out. Right? So, what do you expect? them not to react. So now I've unfortunately left out another thing, that is the independents. Some of the electables went over to, other than this southern Punjab, they went over to PTI. PTI took them. There was a lot of tussle. For example, Sikandar Bosan joined, he was given a ticket, then the ticket was taken away from him, he was given a ticket, the ticket was taken away from him, a lot of hue and cry in the party. Ultimately, he's fighting as independent and he's going to win, according to last results. So you have about 30, 35 MNAs who joined him from PMLN, and about 25 to 30 independents who are going to win, right? Because the last results which are coming in now, which says, if you look at it, about 20 independents are leading at the moment. So 20, 25 independents. The religious factor. TLP, not a single seat. Not a single seat. The MMA, the combination of JI, JUIF, etc., maybe 15 seats. Right. So, even though religion is a factor in Pakistan, if you look at the votes counted for last 50 years, you'll never see them go beyond 13 to 14%. For 50 years. Right. Now, they have a voice. They have a pulpit with the mosque, which they exploit to the hilt. Right. They have emotional issues, which they do. But when it comes down to the people of Pakistan voting in an election, they just do not get the votes.
Why is that?
And that is because a lot of people do not know. But within the cities, the religious parties have some hold in some cities and all. But in the villages, the mullah is considered as a pariah. He lives off people. You know, he's in a mosque, they go and give him donations, they give him clothes. They don't consider him a leader by far. People don't understand that. But it has happened. But in the cities, you know, he's big. Or urban, rural cities, he's big. So I think if you look at it from that point of view, well, Karachi is, at the moment, Karachi MQM is not doing too badly. Is not doing too badly at the moment. At the moment, they're clearly leading at 3 seats at least. The PSP is not yet leading in any seat, but those central Karachi results have yet not come out. But from all accounts, well, yes, I must talk about Sindh. Sindh, there's been surprising. In Sindh, you have a situation where the this group, the Democratic Party, which was GDA, which was set up, right, which consisted of people from disaffected people from PPP, other parties got together, right. Where GDA probably get about 8-9 seats also. So, if you have this thing, and PPP, very surprising, is not leading in the traditional seats that normally they lead in some of the traditional seats. Very surprising. But even though it is clear they will still get a majority. But the majority will be a close run thing when they go out to make a government. They'll have to have a coalition in Sindh. Otherwise, they'll not be able to run the government by itself. So basically, so what you have, if you have Imran is about, in this election, if you have him win about 110 seats plus, then when you count the reserve seats, which comes down because of the proportional seats he gets because of the amount of votes, then he very easily comes close to a mark where he has just got to make a coalition with some on the some in Balochistan, maybe the GDA in Sindh, and of course the independents usually, and in Pakistan it is historically that the independents usually go with the winning party. They say so. Last time about 25 independents, 27 independents went along with PMLN, thereby boosting the PMLN party, this thing, etc. So if that happens, then you will have Imran reaching the magic figure of 172, and beyond 172, and which he can then be, well, whether he chooses to be the next Prime Minister or not, only I think he knows, right? But let me tell you that like 1970, and the last 1970 elections were held under military rule, which was very free and fair. This time also, the elections have been free and fair. There's no, up till now, I mean, they've talked about pre-poll rigging and manipulation, etc., but no hard evidence. And but there has been, generally, people feel absurd. The violence has been tremendous. There have been 37 incidents up till now, which more than 50 people have been killed in incidents. Polling stations have been attacked with hand grenades, a suicide bomber in Quetta, and various other shooting incidents here and there. And of course, 3 candidates in the last 10 days died, and major candidates were killed in that thing. So the violence has been there, but in a country where you have still the infrastructure of terrorism is still there. If we can get away with this much also, I think we are very fortunate. We're very fortunate that we did not have a massive thing, because obviously these things could not have been done without much planning. The suicide bombing, etc., it was planned well ahead, and where it came from, one can only conjecture. And this thing, but I feel that in 1970 the elections were bad for Pakistan, for the reason that it led to the creation of Bangladesh, separation of Pakistan. On the other hand, the 1970 elections were good for West Pakistan. For the first time, it broke hold of the traditional parties, and this time also, if you see, the breaking hold of the traditional parties, and really Imran Khan, who would not have made the government in the last elections by far, but he would have made a good opposition by having at least 35, 40 seats, now has the necessary thing to come. In KPK, until last reports, he's almost sweeping. Even ANP is in the traditional seat, except for 1 seat, 2 seats they're not winning. The PMLN has hardly got any seats there. So if the ANP, the PPP also 1 or 2 seats, right? Where PMLN is doing well is their own electables, like Sialkot area. That is Narowal, Hassan Iqbal is winning, Khurram Dastagir and Gujranwala. Their electables are doing well, except, very surprisingly, in Lahore. Now that is a real surprise to me. That means that all the work that Shehbaz Sharif has done, and because he literally ignored the rest of the province and put all the money into Lahore, in beautifying, give Lahore socio-economic structure, has not had the traction that is required. They should have, PMLN should have, even in the worst circumstances, should have, sort of gone over Lahore. So, I think if you look at it, we are, as I keep on, I'm getting results as they updates as they come in, and it doesn't hurt if you're proved right, but it does hurt, of course, if you're proved wrong. Then people question your credibility. I like Imran. I'm not a member of his party. I do not like a lot of things he does, but I feel that once a person comes into government, and once he chooses his government with care, and and maybe we would have turned a corner that Pakistan needed to turn, and Pakistan very badly needed that turning. Thank you.
Thank you. On the point of proving right, my CEO would like to hear that, and would like to all of us to get that magic formula, and that would be a great business model for us. I have a few questions, but I know there is a very inquisitive audience, and I have a lot of hands up. I saw your hand first. I'll go to you, and then I'll invite my friend James, who is in the SRAP's office, to say a few things and briefly restrict your comments, please. James.
Thank you, Jamie Rubin. Very nice to see you, Ikram. It'd be great if you were proved right for your personal future. The question is whether it's great for the United States. We're here in the United States, and I worry about what you just said. And the reason I worry is because under the current administration, as you know, the relationship collapsed and serious sanctions were imposed. That was in a situation where the political leadership was generally pro-American. I know Imran not as well as you. I know the people around him not as well as you. There is not a pro-American among them. And for 10 years, 20 years almost now, the people around him have been feeding anti-American poison to him. And he has said things and done things that Americans, when they hear about them and see them, are going to be seriously shocked that a Western-oriented, English-speaking, seemingly charming cricket player could be thinking that America plays such a pernicious role in the world. So this is my worry, that you have a policy based on the military activities, which isn't going to change, obviously, but that the political overlay is now going to be 10 times worse than it currently is. Am I exaggerating?
I want to piggyback that question. We're the South Asia Center. We want to also talk to us a little more about the implications in the region, particularly India and Afghanistan.
Jamie, I think a lot of times people take, things, perceptions from, you're very right, from what the people around you say. And people like Shirin Mazari don't know when to shut up, right? So the point is, I want to tell you, frankly speaking, that, I want to raise this question with you, that, and this is very personal. Imran knows that I'm very pro-American, right? He knows that I provide security. My company provides security for the last 30 years.
For him.
Right. Why does Imran trust his personal security to me? Right. For the last 17 years, right? His personal security, his bodyguards, this thing is with me, right? And he knows my views on this issue. I think you will see a difference between the rhetoric and actual happenings, because you see the world is changing at the moment, right? People do not realize here, when the thing cuts from both sides. If you wake up in the morning on a tweet and you say Pakistan is the worst country in the world, right? Right? I mean, you expect people to react, right? But the point is, the world is changing. The world is changing because Europe and Asia, after the BRI, is not two continents. It's one continent, right? The one continent with roads and rail communication, etc. And the old Baghdad Pact, which went into CENTO, and the main thing with Pakistan, Iran, and Turkey, right? Sponsored at that time by United States and UK, etc. Now, if you look at it, they're closer to Russia and China. I put it to you that the linchpin is Pakistan. The linchpin is Pakistan. And it is in the interest of Pakistan to remain neutral, to have a good relationship, as good a relationship, maybe not as good a relationship as with China, but as good a relationship with the United States. Because of the reason that the last relationship, we were very much aligned towards Saudi Arabia, right? Okay. And with the result that we had a problem with Iran. But now I think Iranians understand that our thing, our best stance is to be neutral, is not to take sides either with this group or that group, because it is in our interest, right, to function like that. I feel that the rhetoric, first of all, I would like to say this to you, the rhetoric did not emanate so much from Imran himself. The rhetoric came, no, I cannot, I follow his statements. The rhetoric came mainly from some of the people around him, and I totally agree with you. Like, for example, I mean, Shireen Mazari, I mean, went to the extent of, I mean, at one time when she was threatened because, you know, Shia Sunni thing, she was threatened, we put guards on her, right? For 3 years, the guards remained on her, and then she turns around and tells me that I'm Blackwater. So, I mean, and he's a close advisor to her, or was a close advisor. But now, she has been taken over by more educated, more refined people, better understanding, etc. And you will, I think you will find that a more moderate Pakistan will come out of this, not an extremist Pakistan. And I think that's in the best interest of everybody.
Sure.
Us included, Pakistan included, India included, because the CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, right, tremendous. For us, it's a God-given thing. It makes no sense without India participating in it, right? And I know for certain that at their grassroots level, they have discussed this, that we have to come to this thing. It doesn't depend on Mr. Imran Khan that much. It depends on Mr. Modi. Mr. Modi has to decide that, you know, CPEC can live with. Right? So I think at the end of the day, you may find a more neutral Pakistan, a Pakistan that looks, does not go into any bloc, but thinks in terms of, okay, let me, you know, be genuinely neutral in this region so that we are not going into the Sunni bloc, or we are not aligning ourselves with Pakistan, with Iran and Turkey, and going into a different category. So this is my personal opinion. I'm not sure.
May I just briefly follow up? I heard all that. I hope you're exactly right. That would be wonderful, and really it would be. But in the near term, when the votes are counted and if they come out the way you've suggested, and the first wave of analysis is made about the attitudes and views of the new government towards the United States of America, are you worried that this will be worse rather than better?
Okay, let me ask you another question. Today, I'll counter question you. What is our immediate problem? Our immediate problem is to pay back our debts. The Nawaz Sharif government in the last 5 years had doubled our debt. Our debt for the last 50 years have been doubled in the last 5 years, right? We have no money to pay for. Our foreign exchange reserves are down. So we have to look for a bailout from the IMF. You think that bailout will be, of course, every bailout is conditional, but without the help of the United States, you think we're going to get a bailout, right? So if Imran is really looking to the interest of Pakistan, then he has to understand that where the compromises have to be made. Right?
Just hope you talk to him a lot.
I would probably not get to talk to him much more, but that's besides the point.
James.
Yeah. So I want to follow up on this a little bit. So as Barath said, I was a senior advisor to the U.S. Special Representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan. Worked on Pakistan for a while. From the U.S. policy perspective, I'm now not in government. I'm a consultant with various affiliations. But I mean, I would say a couple things. One, just to augment what Ikram said. One, I think as a non-Pakistani, it is incredibly impressive that the world's 5th largest democracy for the first time is having its third vote, and third consecutive timely vote. And by all observer report, the actual mechanics of the vote are going well. Now, I have a slightly different impression that Ikram presented on the nature of military role in candidate selection, in the actual party affiliation of candidates, in some of the underlying kind of party dynamics that back this process, but the actual mechanics of a vote for the third time in a row seem to actually be going pretty well. So that's good news. It's also great news to see a lot of women voting and a lot of kids going with their parents to vote. These are indications that, that democracy and democratic kind of the idea of governance, the process is starting to embed a little bit. But I mean, two cautions. One is the point about extremist participation. I'd be interested. I'm not seeing real-time election data. One of the there were two indicators that I was looking for. One was the performance of Milli Muslim League, which has been, which is essentially a front for Lashkar-e-Taiba. Hafiz, and Hafiz Saeed, is actually running for a seat in this case. These are designated terrorists. MML has been identified by the United States government as an alias for LET, and at least what I was hearing this morning is they were a possible subordinate partner in a PTI-led coalition. Now a small partner, because they're not going to get many seats, as you were describing, but that would be highly concerning if to see the normalization of that kind of group. Now, I understand from a political military perspective what ISI and the military may be considering when it comes to their affiliates. These entities that these proxies that they've cultivated, and that is to try to create an exit strategy to normalization. There's very little evidence so far.
Could you explain that?
So there's the militant organization. How do you get a militant organization to stop being a threatening militant organization? You turn it into a political party. I mean, that's the generic
normalization
theory.
of the extremists.
The normalization in the political sense, the mainstreaming of a party. There's very little evidence that is happening with LET, with the India-focused terrorist groups that exist in Pakistan. But we'll see. Certainly from a U.S. perspective, it's deeply concerning, and from a global perspective, deeply concerning. The other part was some of the Ulema Council kind of endorsements of party leaders from PMLN and from PTI. It happened with a number of Imran Khan's close associates. It also happened with former Prime Minister Shahid Khakan Abbasi, and also former multi-minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister of Defense, Minister of Commerce, Dastagir Khan, in the recent government, where a Shura council called the ASWJ publicly endorsed, kind of laid hands and endorsed these candidates locally. Now it's unclear how how much of effect that would have had on an electoral sense, but as a perception problem, that these candidates were welcoming of those endorsements is again concerning from a Western, from a non-Pakistani perspective. But I mean, those are just, I think, things to be cautious about and things to watch when we think about this situation. Going ahead, the economic situation is the first thing that has to be considered. For the third consecutive time, a government will have essentially put the throttle on spending in its run for re-election, and left the current account in shambles, and that will be something that this government has to deal with on day one. As of today, they have 1.7 months of import cover in terms of their bounds of payments. IMF rules govern that you're supposed to keep up on balance of 3 months of import coverage in your foreign exchange reserves. They're already there. In about a month, they'll be down in about 1, and we'll be talking about balance of payments crisis again. I expect them to go to the IMF. We'll see. The short-term payment is to the Chinese, a bridge loan that this recent government got about 3 months ago to cover exactly this balance of payments from ICBC, a Chinese state-controlled bank. The Chinese could forgive that. The Chinese could reschedule the debt. There are all kinds of mechanisms, but that would take off some of the pressure in the short term. And then in terms of implications, I talked about the extremist implication for U.S. policy. I think my advice would be that, and my view of this would be that currently any attention towards Pakistan in the United States is probably bad or negative. There's very little positive attention that could be offered from a performance and behavior perspective when it comes to the new government or the outgoing government, and also to a general situation on the ground. The performance on terrorism, the performance on nuclear weapons, and the development of additional capabilities are deeply concerning and going to be deeply concerning. We saw what the president said on Monday morning or Sunday evening about Hassan Rouhani, the president of Iran, and some relatively benign and calm comments about, saying we don't want war with them, but if we have war, we're going to defend ourselves. I can only imagine when Imran Khan talks to Fareed Zakaria next week and says something like, Trump better not knock on this door, what the president says. So I would be cautious. But if the new government wants to offer some progress on some of these longstanding grievances on Afghanistan, where Pakistan continues to have major influence on the nuclear program, I think there could be room for an interesting and positive discussion. This is an area where the grand overture diplomacy of this administration could actually yield some useful results in the long term. And then second, on China, and I think that's the most interesting one in the short term. It's clear to me, having worked with the Chinese a lot, that what they're looking for from Pakistan are known knowns. They like governments and leaders that they're familiar with. They don't like uncertainty. And Imran Khan is all uncertainty from their perspective. He's tried to cultivate that relationship. He's traveled to China. He's met with President Xi. We'll see. But that's going to be a relationship that has to be developed and negotiated at the same time as Pakistan has to negotiate a bailout of itself. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and I think it's a good thing for Pakistani democracy that the elections happened, and it's a good thing that new faces may be in charge. We'll see who those faces are and how they perform. But it will be yet another adventure in Pakistani democracy.
Thank you. I'll take two more, and then you can respond. You and then I'll come.
Good. Excuse me. My name's Arnold Zeitlin, and I'm probably the only other witness in this room to the election of 1970, yes. If you recall, right? Yes. The short question I want to ask is, so what? And the extension of that question is, will this election change at all the power structure? In other words, who makes power, who makes policy in Pakistan? We talked about Mr. Modi being important, but as long as Mr. Modi and his country remain an enemy, the military holds sway in Pakistan. Yeah.
Okay. As far as terrorism is concerned, I want to come back to you and start. Terrorism is concerned because I think, we've lost 6,000 soldiers dead over the last 12 years and over 25,000 injured, right? I think if you look at it, one can say that we've been fighting terrorism, right?
Oh, certainly.
As far as the nuclear side is concerned, I think till very recently, and I think it really started with Abdul Qadir Khan, we were sort of, we were never considered a threat to anybody else at any time. And I'm a director of East West Institute, and there was a presentation about 6 months ago, and they said the predominant crisis, and they had the two people in Iran and North Korea. And I was smiling, and Ross Perot Jr. asked me, he says, what makes you smile? I said, thank God we are not there in that particular list, right? Okay, so I think, you have to understand that our nuclear thing remains the deterrent to India. India has an overwhelming force. Please explain to me why should they have four-fifths of their armed forces on our borders? right? Why not fight the Chinese, which come to you every time and encroach upon your territory, etc.? We are their primary threat as they're concerned, so reciprocally that is there. I think, you know, I want to take on this question about the religious parties. Hafiz Saeed is not going to win a seat, right? The MMA, which is a JUIF and JI together, the group of them, they are going to win seats. They're going to win maybe 15 to 18 seats, right? But the TLP or Hafiz Saeed and his party are not going to win any seats, right? So I don't think they're going to be a factor whether they endorse somebody or not in any government in Pakistan to that extent, right? The thing which we understand very clearly is, and I think when I was answering Jamie's question, is that we have to be very pragmatic about our economic compulsions. We have a real serious crisis on our hands. That crisis, the first thing which is going to hit the crisis, of course, is not going to be very popular when he starts importing chips from abroad and bread from abroad, right? I mean, if anything, Pakistan is a country which can feed and clothe itself, right? Which is not many third world countries can feed and clothe yourself, right? So I think if you start importing in stuff like chips and bread and meat, etc., which we export, so it does make a difference. So I think that is a economic thing. I think pragmatism will see that we will sit down and work with the United States. I think this is my feeling. I'm not I'm part of Imran Khan's party. I'm not part of his think tanks or anything like that. But I feel that the people who are around him, I know some of them, and they are pragmatic people, and they will go on the side of caution rather than the side of extremism, right? Now, as the two people who have seen this 1970 elections, it makes a difference. You know, the way I'm a member of the World Economic Forum Partnership Against Corruption Initiative, the Global Legislative Council for Anti-Corruption and Anti-Money Laundering, for the World Economic Forum. And for the last 6 years, before that I was in the Global Legislative Council for Counterterrorism. Then I changed over to this because I found that terrorism cannot be done without funding. You can put a person in a suicide jacket, but you've got to buy that explosive and you can't buy it off a shelf. You've got to set up, you've got to have a full-fledged organized crime, this thing which provides the logistics, the explosives and stuff like that, the transportation, the accommodation, etc. You know, the biggest crooks in the world, they live around Hyde Park in London. The biggest crooks in the world, right? And you see the laws of England. The laws of England said that nothing can be purchased in cash over £10,000. Nothing can be purchased in cash over £10,000. Most of it is purchased in cash, right? So I think over the last 2 years, even the British have, started making their laws tougher, and they've started implementing their laws. They have done a few major things, like, for example, the Jersey government returned about $1 billion of Nigeria, right? So I think if you look at it, the major thing about Pakistan is the money that went outside. If you take $5 to $6 to $7 billion outside every year out of a poor country like Pakistan, right? And what's going to happen? So, if anything, if Imran can at least get the accountability into action, right, and have some of the money returned, or at least stop the hemorrhaging of money, the way it was doing. I would say even if he stops hemorrhaging, stop the hemorrhaging of money, I think so what would have been useful, right? My own feeling is, sir, I've lived through 2.5 wars. 65, 71, fought in Balochistan also, right? And 1973. I feel, my own feeling is, and over last 20 years of writing, counseling the, again and again talking about national security strategy in the National Defense University, Air War College, and in the Naval War College, talking about one thing. The army has no business running the government because you're not equipped to run the government. And I've been saying that again and again and again. Now,
that hasn't stopped them, though.
No, it hasn't stopped them, but the point is that then they should remove me from, they should have revoked my security clearances for lecturing in these institutions, because I keep saying these things, right? Let's take it from that point. Let's take the positive point of view. And then they've got something called the Army Green Book. And the Army Green Book, for the last 6 years, my article comes out, which more or less says the same thing over and over again, right? So I think, whereas your concern about foreign policy objectives are concerned, the Army's input, direction, whatever you may think, is justified. Not within Pakistan, not in domestic policies. Not in domestic policies. Not for sometimes. It stopped after Musharraf, because Kiani took the army away from it, right? That is different, what happened to Kiani himself. But then Raheel Sharif and now Qamar Bajwa have done a terrific job of keeping the army separate from domestic policies, right? Now, that is not to say that they didn't make their preference known as far as the elections are concerned, right?
It's the same thing. I mean,
no, sir. It's not the same thing. If you can give me one instance, one person who can come and say that my arm was twisted, I was made to leave PMLN to join PTI or to become an independent, there is no evidence. The other day, the Justice Shaukat Siddiqui, from the Islamabad High Court, who, by the way, declared the guy who killed Salman Taseer a hero in open court. Right, he said, the people came and told me you must give, etc. And he was asked by the Chief Justice, he says, give some evidence. If somebody's come to you.
But did you have to twist arms when the past Prime Minister sits in jail?
No.
I mean, that's the message.
No, but if he's sitting in jail for something that he has done something, if he cannot explain how in 1993 he bought a flat for which he's saying he got the money for in 2003. Explain this miracle to me, right? He's on record. On 2003, he paid for a flat which he bought in 1993, right? It's on record. In the Colibri font, trust deeds were made, which the font did exist, but was not in commercial use. And they say that, they talk about Robert Radley, the person who did the investigation on that. They talk about him no end in Pakistan. Not once have they talked about it in London. Why not? Because he will go after them and sue them, right? So the point is that, the perception and reality, can be quite different.
So I have you, and then you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, Doug Brooks,
Hi, Doug.
American Chamber of Commerce. I apologize for missing the first few minutes, but two questions. One I think is fairly short, and one a little bit more involved. First question is on who does the security for the voting booths and everything in Pakistan. Is it only the army and the state forces, or have they looked to outsource some of that, which would seem to make sense considering the problems they've been facing? And second, quite different question from the Afghan perspective. What are the implications of this election? How is this going to change the relationship between the two countries?
Well, I'll take your question.
Well, mine was a follow-up to the second question. If your predictions are correct, then what would be the impact on policy, if anything, any changes with regard to Afghanistan, in particular relations with the Taliban? And from that, counter-terrorism efforts within Pakistan itself. Thank you. Terry Taylor.
I think the first thing about the Election Commission of Pakistan requested the army to provide security in the polling booths. And I think that was quite justified for the reason that you've seen there were 37 attacks all across the country. About almost 50 people died in this last today in the elections, right? So I think from that point of view, the other one was that you said.
The second question was on Afghanistan. But the question
all right.
why private security
Yeah,
is used.
right. You know, I feel, my own feeling is that a lot of it, a lot of what will happen between Pakistan and Afghanistan is of course driven by the army. And the army is very, very clear because all the initiatives have been taken by the last Chief of Army Staff and the present Chief of Army Staff to reach out to President Ashraf Ghani. And let me tell you, they've been talking to each other almost on every second, third day basis, directly on telephone, right? And with the result that if you find out that the latest initiative where they're trying to get the Taliban onto a negotiating table to talk and get them to be part of the government, right, is a part of this. My own feeling is that we or Afghanistan, we have no other choice. If peace has to come to the region, then you have to sit down somewhere with the Taliban and get them into the process of government, right? Now, that by itself is going to be a hard thing because now there are many factions of the Taliban. And the major threat is not the Taliban. The major threat is the Islamic State. Because some of the suicide bombers that are coming through are not Taliban. They are the Islamic State, right? And that, I think, that is what is driving both the Afghans and the Pakistanis to come to some arrangement as quickly as possible.
Yes, hello, Ikram. My name is Chris Osborne. I'm the editor of Warrior Maven Global Security and News Operation. My question is sort of threefold. One of them was already touched upon. The first one is, could you elaborate a little bit on some of the activities the Pakistan military is doing to further safeguard the elections? And then secondly, I'd be very interested, given the stated concerns, what your thoughts are as to why a new administration might be neutral, etc., or at least not negative to America. And then lastly, how would you characterize the longer-term terrorism threat there in light of a potential transition? I'm sorry, that's so much at once.
I wanted to ask you about his Mr. Imran Khan's relationship with India. What are his views? It's very possible that after several decades you will have a Prime Minister in Pakistan who has extensively traveled inside India, both as a cricketer, also on his social life. He has a lot of friends in India, like other Prime Ministers in the past. So, since you have interacted with him quite frequently, can you tell us what is, and how do you see it shaping up in the next few months?
Excuse me, could you repeat the question?
His views on Mr. Imran Khan's views on India-Pakistan relationship and how it's going to shape up in the coming months.
Also, the context is India is going into an election mode very likely in the next 5-6 months.
First of all, let me answer about security, about the elections. No, I think almost about 350,000 soldiers were used in the election booth, but it was not the soldiers only. They also requisitioned a lot of private security companies, which they additionally put on the soldiers. They requisitioned the paramilitary forces, they requisitioned the police, etc., etc. So there were 3 different layers of cover for the elections. And I think my own feeling is that the worst of it is when you have election rallies and all, and when targets become very lucrative for suicide bombers and all. I think that is over with. So I think post-election you will not find the amount of violence that was there leading up to the elections. And I think that side, our security forces should be quite content that the amount of damage, collateral damage, has been as little as possible, right? It could have been far more. At least we ourselves in the private sector predicted that it would probably go into the hundreds, right? But I think the worst case scenario did not happen. Now, India, I think, you know, you're very right about this. Imran is one of the few Pakistanis who know almost every Indian leader by name. One of the few Pakistanis, right? Many times, a lot of Indians have contributed to his charity hospitals and all that, right? And if I may say so, a lot of Indian cricketers also endorsed his campaign, right? So I mean, these are things which have been noticed by people. So I think he has. I think if he will certainly try to reach out to India, right? Because unlike people think, that we are, the Pakistan Army is hostage to a enmity with India. I think the major concern in Pakistan's security establishment is the security of the China-Pakistan economic corridor. And they feel, rightly or wrongly, that India, because it's vocally against the China-Pakistan economic corridor, that India may take certain steps to undermine its security. And therefore, the reciprocal things that you have. But I think, first of all, I think, if anything, and I must say this, that Imran Khan is not going to be I don't think any government, new government comes in, is not going to be reaching out for foreign policy objectives. At the first time, they'll try to get their own house in order inside. They look inwards, right? But I think one of the primary objectives would be to come to some arrangement with India as soon as possible to reduce the tensions. And I think that, look, to Mr. Nawaz Sharif's credit, he did his level best. Right, he went into Modi's swearing-in ceremony. He went to other this thing, etc., etc. But he reached out to him in the SARC, this thing, etc. But two have to play the game, and I think that way this thing. Now, of course, this is all subject to your elections, the Indian elections that are coming up in the next 1 year. December, right? So, if Pakistan is going to be another bogey, then we are done for. Then our relationship for the next thing is done for, right? But if it's not going to be a bogey, then I think we can hope for something.
The neutral element, I know you touched on this earlier, but what's again some of your estimation as to why the new government would be U.S. neutral?
My own feeling is that it will be U.S. neutral because it sees, it does not see Iran as a natural ally, or for that reason Saudi Arabia, right? During the time that Saudis wanted Pakistani troops in Yemen, right, Iran was the most vocal of them to say, no, we do not want to send Saudi troops to Yemen, right? At the same time, he doesn't have a very close relationship with Iran either, right? So I think from that point of view, I think the entire lot of people around him, or people advising him, are counseling neutrality more than anything else. Please. So. Yes.
My question is, do you see any role for the RCD or SAKRC, SARC? The RCD was 1970. It was Turkey, Iran, Pakistan. SARC, of course, much more recently. There seems to be more of one.
In fact, sir, you asked my favorite subject, the RCD. People do not realize when they talk about CPEC that the RCD set up a lot of highways and railway connections, right? So the RCD expanded into ECO. RCD actually now today has become the Economic Cooperation Organization, which says not Pakistan, Iran, and Turkey, but also the CIS countries. So I think it just needs a little work to really have the connectivity in the region, which is good for this region. This is good for this region. I think there is a great amount of traction there. Great amount of traction there. Now, obviously, if it stays economic, they will be benefit to everybody. But if it goes into political overtones, right, which it may do so not because of what they want, but if there are early morning tweets from here, then an enemy, if an enemy is a friend.
What about
SARC? I don't think India is going to allow that, because I think India at the moment almost like Bangladesh, it almost controls, right? Sri Lanka barely out of its zone. Nepal is barely out of its zone. Maldives, this thing, etc. So I think India seems to think that if Pakistan would come in, people would gang up against India. So that is the fear they have. And that is why they have almost made SARC moribund. SARC doesn't work. Which is one of the, SARC is one of the best ideas of its time, because the South Asian economy is complementary. The jute from Bangladesh is used up in Pakistan or in this thing. The wheat from Pakistan and Indian Punjab, and etc. The rice, etc. The Sindh parboiled rice is used up in Bangladesh, right? The tea from Bangladesh is used up in Pakistan because the low-grown tea. The Pakistanis like low-grown tea. So you have a lot of complementary tea. Iron ore from India. We're getting iron ore at double the cost that we get from Australia. Double the cost. Why shouldn't it come from India? The coal that we require, that now Thar Parker has the coal, right? We can give this, etc. If the connectivity is there, there is tremendous amount of economic resurgence that can happen in this area.
Also have a SARC satellite.
Yeah, have a SARC.
I'm an Afghan correspondent. My question is regarding Pakistan election, parliamentary election impact to Afghanistan. Do you think that Pakistan policy will change toward Afghanistan?
I think to start with, if you look at it, Pakistan is the only country in the world which does not take a penny for transit trade. Anything which passes through Pakistan, the Pakistan government does not take any fees for it, right? Of course, etc. Which is etc. Then most of food stuffs inside Afghanistan goes from Pakistan. The flour, the wheat flour, the one is like the reddish wheat, right? With everything. So in places in Pakistan, the factories which only make the flour for Afghanistan. But what happens is, because of that atta, which they call, going out of Afghanistan, the prices in Pakistan rise. And similarly, a lot of things. On the other hand, from Afghanistan, we do get dry fruits and things like that. But obviously, Afghanistan is not a manufacturing. We have a manufacturing base. Afghanistan doesn't. But I think, like I answered earlier, I think you will have, I think we are moving towards, whether we like it or not, towards a better relationship.
So, one more, and then I have.
Hi, thanks for that riveting discourse. I know we traversed the gamut from geopolitics to security. I know we touched enough on Imran Khan, so I want to touch on something very different. Just in the first part of what you mentioned about Hafiz Syed and said Mini Muslim League would not get a single vote. My trepidation
not a vote,
a single seat, sorry.
Yeah.
My trepidation is that's almost partly like there's a view that's apologetic because they do have sanctions on them. He has 10 million bounty, and yet he's giving talks in Lahore. But the fact that he's still out there, it almost comes across that, Pakistan views good terror and bad terror, which comes across to what Hillary Clinton said, that you can't keep snakes in your backyard, expecting them to bite your neighbors. And just a second point about trade that you mentioned. I know about the 4G fund being $20 billion and stuff, but even under the 4G fund, Pakistan won't export steel to India. There's no MFN status. That's a $2 billion trade between India and Pakistan, and that could easily go up to $10 billion. So while the army owns a monopoly on a lot of the economy, it's still, some argue they don't understand.
There's a formal $2 billion.
I think that I'm glad you asked this question, because on the Fauji Foundation, I'm a bit of an expert, right? I think this is total nonsense, because yes, they have fertilizer factories, right? They don't have a single steel mill, right? They have fertilizer factories which were made in those areas where no businessman would previously go to. So they made these fertilizer factories there, right? They started the sugar mills in the 60s, where people would not open sugar mills. So they went and opened sugar mills, and so they have a few sugar mills. Because of that, in oil and gas, right, when they were in those areas in big fertilizer factories, and in Murray gas, for example, the particular gas field that from where the army, the Fauji Foundation gets at the thing. But the Fauji Foundation the Fauji Foundation, entire profits of Fauji Foundation are very much a public record. And the entire profits of Fauji Foundation goes towards the benefit of ex-servicemen. They have hospitals, they have schools, they have things like that, etc. You know, so I think that the thing number one, you know, this thing about being major control of the economy, etc., etc. Excuse me for using the word, but nonsense. Because if you look at Pakistan and you look at people and the titans like Mancha, right? Mancha owns more than the Fauji Foundation. Hussain Dawood owns more than the Fauji Foundation, right? There I can name about another the present ambassadors Ali Jahangir Siddiqui, his father, right? Jahangir Siddiqui, banks and all that, they own more, right? So I can name about 20 Pakistanis that each of them have more than the Fauji Foundation, right? Yes, it is true they've got some concessions, right? But not on the scale that people talk about, not on the this thing, etc. Now, about you talked about Hafiz Saeed. Look, I'm one of those who agree with you totally. This is not a gentleman that I would like to see in my drawing room, right? But the fact of the matter remains that he's not been let off by the army or anybody. He's been let off by the judiciary system of Pakistan, because they have said again and again, provide us the evidence. Whenever he's brought to trial, the evidence is not. They've asked India for the evidence, right? And it's on record that the things are. Hafiz Saeed, to me, I am for one who say he should not. They should not. None of these people should have been even allowed near the voting system. And I think I take something from what you said, that this is a part of the strategy to get them, to make them kosher, right? In a sense, you know, etc. Get in. But I think at the end of the day, the fact of the matter, when the results are out and you see the percentage of votes that have fallen for them, it will show how minimal their influence is in Pakistani politics.
So before we close, sir, what happens to Nawaz Sharif now personally and Maryam Sharif?
Look, let me tell you, personally I like Nawaz Sharif. I like Nawaz Sharif. He's a decent human being. I think my own feeling is, and he's got carried away with Maryam's ambitions. And I think if you look at the relationship between the two brothers and Maryam, you know the problem is within the family. You know, the brothers have, and I've heard it from very close sources from within the family, the brothers have berated Maryam again and again for what she's been doing, etc. For some reason, Maryam ambition, she thinks of her as a latter-day Benazir, right? She thinks that, you know, she can come out, etc., and she has that charisma, etc. She doesn't. She doesn't have the charisma. You know, I tell you frankly, I was a great critic of Benazir, but that woman really had charisma. Really, really had it. You know, I was in the World Economic Forum for me where there was a problem about passes, and so 2 days I was her only aide, and I saw the charisma in action among world leaders. You know, and this woman really had charisma about her. You know, you have to be something very special to have that sort of thing. And I'm sorry to say, Maryam doesn't even come close to it, and neither in education, neither in sophistication, neither in, you know, anything. That word, the world, her world exists around, you know, quietly, that thing on her father's this thing, etc., which is, I don't think is the thing. You know, if you look at Benazir's speeches, of course she was her father's daughter, right? But at the end of the day, her policies were totally this thing. I know the last thing happened was she rang me up from when she was the thing, and she said, Mr. Sehgal, I'd like you to come and work with me. So I said, Madam Prime Minister, I'm a great critic of yours. He said, that's why we want you to be close to me. So instead of criticizing me, you would advise me the right things. Now that, I think, is the type of things that you want to hear from leaders. Right. Thank you.
On that note, thank you.
Thank you.
James, just